For those of you who just tuned in looking for the history of the Mizpah, originally on this property was the Mizpah Saloon. That was prior to 1905 when the Brower Building was built next to it. The Brower Building is that 3-story building which is attached to the 5-story Mizpah Hotel. The construction for the 5-story part was started in 1907 and finished in November of 1908. It can boast of having the original 1907 elevator still in use in the hotel today.
That's a nice slow elevator, huh? Wow. This is a majestic old hotel. About as majestic as you can find.
That it is. The last time we stayed at the Mizpah a few years back, it was specifically to do a ghost hunt on the 5th floor. This time we were passing through town for other business and the 5th floor was occupied, so we had to take a place on the 4th floor. If I recall accurately, it was room 409. For the money, these rooms are decent sized, and all of the rooms we looked at, including this one, appeared to be very clean.
That's kind of cool.
Even though we didn't specifically stay here to do a hunt, I never travel without the equipment and not beyond setting it up. You never know when something might just materialize, and you'll certainly kick yourself in the butt later on if you weren't prepared for it. Well, not much has changed since our last visit, including our sleeping habits.
We missed the breakfast.
We always miss the breakfast, dear. We've never made one yet in any hotel we've been in, except for the Drury.
In Drury.
The Drury. Wow. Listen to that squeaky ass door.
If you're smart, elevator bring us to the ground floor.
Yeah, this thing is this is about the slowest elevator that I've ever been on. I think you could walk down the stairs faster.
There has been one major change made to the hotel. During our first investigation, we stayed in room 502, the Lady in Red Suite, which is supposedly the haunted room of the hotel, as bore out by the sign which is placed next to the door. From the evidence gleaned in that room, and we did pick up some, we posted our first video, StanJanParanormal's review of the Lady's Suite, which has been online for a few years now. Sometime between then and now, the ghost apparently felt that she was tired of her meager accommodations and vied for a larger room. That sign is no longer here. It's been now moved to a suite, which of course garners more money now on a commercial level. On their newly designed website, apparently the hotel rationalizes this move based upon the readings of a psychic that was brought in, also sometime between then and now. This psychic told them all about their Lady in Red and how she was murdered not in room 502, but in room 512, which is probably where they moved the sign to. I don't know, I didn't take time to look. According to this psychic, who pretty much followed the storyline in her reading, the Lady in Red was a prostitute whose call name was Rose, while her real name was Evelyn Mae Johnston, and she was murdered in the hotel on January 2nd, 1914, which would have been about 7 years after the hotel opened. Since her call name was Rose, that explains why roses are always found laying around on the 5th floor. In our first video, we showed how some patrons from the bar across the road came up and left a few roses outside of our door as we slept. Kind of an in-house joke, I guess. Pretty much all of what the psychic said was just a repeat of the legend. And of course, when records are checked, census reports and birth certificates, things of that nature, no such person by the name of Evelyn Mae Johnson, Evelyn Johnston, Mae Johnston, or any deviation thereof, is found in any of the legal records. And the first death that was recorded to have occurred in the Mizpah happened in September of 1912, when that of a J.F. Dennis, a prominent lawyer, died in what was called his apartments in the Mizpah Hotel. Apparently, the early rooms were made into apartments. Since it says apartments, we can assume it was more than one room, probably a room for sleeping and a room for conducting business. And I think it would be safe to assume that because he was a man of prominence, those rooms probably would have been on the highest floor of the hotel, the 5th floor. This was listed as a natural death, a heart attack. Skipping ahead somewhat, we find that another natural death occurred in September of 1931 of another patron in the hotel. and also described in the Reno newspaper as that the death occurred in her apartment. So we now know that at least between the years 1912 and 1931, some of the rooms in this hotel were rented by the month or by the year. In May of 1929, the wife of the lessee of the Mizpah Hotel died in her quarters, although it doesn't specifically say that they were staying at the hotel. But you probably assume that if they owned the hotel, they probably had lodging there. There were other odd occurrences over the years. In 1915, the assistant clerk from the Mizpah shot himself over some girl he met at a party. They really didn't have to report his age on this one. Probably the most heinous thing that happened in the hotel, other than the mythical Lady in Red murder, was a real-life murder that occurred in November of 1953. Ernest Douglas, a 72-year-old front desk clerk, who was crippled and only had one leg, was beaten to death by a man who returned from a heavy night of drinking out on the town, and found upon returning that he had misplaced his room key somewhere. When he tried to get his second key from Douglas, Douglas refused because he couldn't identify himself as being a patron. The man, identified in the newspapers as Joseph C. Howard, a mining engineer and consultant, and a full decade younger than the victim, jumped over the counter and began to beat the room clerk up. And that's where the newspaper ends with the details, but I got the rest of the story from the local museum. Apparently, Howard then dragged the victim up to his room, forced him to use his passkey to open the door, and then beat him more. Other patrons coming to the hotel to register found the trail of blood and called the local police, who then showed up and tracked the trail of blood all the way to the door, where they forced their way into the room and found the victim. Howard had forced the old man to sit in a chair where he had bled out. Even though the newspaper says he was transported to a hospital, the general consensus from the museum is that he was DOA. 10 days later, the newspaper printed notification of his funeral. 2 months later, in January of 1954, Howard went on trial for first-degree murder. He was found guilty, but not of first-degree murder, of the lesser charge of manslaughter. And boy, there were some oddities about this trial. 3 times they had to go through the voir dire process for the jury, and it took 13 ballots by the jury to reach a decision. So let's see if I got this right. This 72-year-old man with one leg is doing his job working as a front desk clerk when this drunk guy comes in, jumps over the counter and beats the old man up, drags him up to his room where he beats him up again and makes him sit in a chair until he bleeds out, and the jury wants leniency for the guy that killed him? Wow, this old desk clerk must have been one real peach of an old guy. It's almost like they wanted to give the killer an award or something for killing him. Anyway, this is one heinous death that did occur in the hotel, but we don't know what room or floor it was in. Alan Metzer, who works at the local museum, also told me of a couple of other deaths that he knew of, because he was born and raised in this town and has never moved away. One of them, at one time, they had a display down in the lobby where they were putting on hula dances for some kind of exhibit, and one of the women that was dancing died of a heart attack on stage. A second event was a suicide by shooting of a young man, but he couldn't remember which floor it was on, 3rd or 4th. He was called upon to move the body down, though, and he recounted how they had to bring it down through what was then the diner in front of people to get it out of the hotel. To the best of his recollection, both of those events occurred in the 1960s. In January of 1966, the Mizpah closed its doors, went out of business. This was big news. Even bigger news when 9 months later, the 4th floor of the hotel caught fire for some unexplained reason. So you can see from these reports, and there were many more, that this was a very prominent building in the state, and anything that happened in this hotel was recorded very carefully. The newspapers watched it like a hawk for a story, and certainly that also would have included the murder of a prostitute in the hallway of the hotel. The U.S. Census reports for the hotel can be found online. Here's the one for the Mizpah Hotel in 1920. No one by the last name that's identified is found anywhere on this report. There are only 2 single women listed in this 1920 census for the Mizpah. Both of them list their occupations, and neither one of them lists being a prostitute, or anything that could be inferred as such, like unemployed or home health worker, something of that nature. The story of the Lady in Red doesn't pan out, and yet the sightings keep coming. Yeah, there's some activity here. A little anyway.
Come on now, get on it. Get close to it, you can set it off. Doesn't do any good just to set one light off. Hurry up, get on, get next to it. Go on, set it off. Well, you're kind of weak there, ain't you? Yeah. Beep.
A few REM pod and detector hits each day we were there was basically the crux of what we captured. On this trip, the Mizpah provided little in the line of entertainment. We had to give it a activity rating level of very low and sporadic. But we'll keep trying in future visits. We pass through this way frequently now.